Hi everybody, this is Johnnie. I'm going to be going over the Performance Assessment Guide for CalTPA Cycle 1 for multiple subject people. In this video, I'm going to go over the overview. Later videos, Step 1 Plan, Step 2 Teach and Assess, Step 3 Reflect, Step 4 Apply, and the videos that probably will matter most to you, the rubrics. I'm going to be taking each of the rubrics apart, so do look for that video. Let's get started. So Cycle 1 is all about how will you plan for students, knowing what you know about your students and taking the time to know your students so you can plan well for them. Teaching a good lesson, reflecting on the lesson, and thinking about what you might do next for them. So that kind of cycle right here. Cycle 1 focuses on development and an engaging content-specific lesson for one class and 3 focus students. The 3 focus students are the big deal in this cycle, so keep that in mind. Cycle 1 focuses on developing an engaging content-specific lesson for one class and 3 focus students based on what you learn about their diverse assets and learning needs, including their prior knowledge, interests, and developmental considerations. So you need to know a lot about them. Anytime you see a word underlined like this, that means it's in the glossary and you should go look it up. Here's a way of thinking about this cycle. It should be focused on, you should focus a lesson on one topic. So one good day with one good lesson. You're not trying to teach 5 things. It's not about how much you get into kids' heads. It's about doing one lesson well. And it should be good for all of your students, but in particular for your 3 focus students. You want to be thinking about working from their assets. And a way of thinking about that is good things they bring to their learning and learning needs. And do look up those definitions at the back of the guide just so you understand what those are. You don't want to be coming to this cycle from my kids don't know things and I'm going to fix them. So no deficit understandings of kids. You want to be working from what they bring to their learning and focus on that wholeheartedly. And essentially you have to show that you really have taken time to know your students. And this will be apparent a little bit later about what the things you need to know in order to do a good lesson. This puts it all kind of in a nutshell. You will collect information on your 3 focus students and use that information as you plan and teach your lesson to make that lesson appropriate and engaging for these students. So that's the first 2 parts here. But then you're also going to reflect on that work and think about what you might do with them further on. You need to have appropriate learning goals. You need to be working on that with your mentor teacher or your instructors. But there are a couple other facets of this cycle that you need to pay close attention to as well. One of them is assessment, and it's not assessment in giving tests and things like that. It's about paying attention to your kids while you are teaching them and while they are learning. So the cycle also focuses on how you monitor student learning during the lesson, and then, based on that, make appropriate adaptations to support individual student learning needs. So you have to make space in your teaching to check for understanding, and based on those checks for understanding, you make things better for your students. So here's a way of thinking about it. While you are teaching, you will need to pay attention to how students are engaging with what you set out. You will need to adjust in response to what your students do. So here's some thoughts. You might restate something, give an alternative explanation, offer a different way to approach the work, ask a question to have students rethink something. In other words, you don't want to have your lesson plan be a script. It should be really good and have really good things for you and for the kids to do, but there should be space in it for you to check how they're doing, and then you should come prepared with some other ways you might make the lesson more rich, add a different explanation, and questions are going to matter a lot. So you want to think about what is important is that your teaching is in response to students' thinking and activity, not just a delivery of content or performance. I'll get to questions in just a moment here when we talk about higher order thinking. But let's look here. You will just demonstrate how you establish a positive and safe learning environment. So that's another piece of this too. And you will have to give evidence for this in the video requirements. Just how your manner with your students, the kinds of talk you have with them, all those things that you do as a teacher to encourage good community in your classroom and productive learning. The other piece that matters in this is you want to promote higher order thinking. And there are a couple ways to do this, and I'm going to get back to questions here. Your lesson does not have to be grand. It could be one lesson that is part of a series of lessons on a topic. It does, however, need to ask students to do some thinking for themselves, address an interesting question, connect to something that truly matters in the subject. So come with good questions, and you should start with a good one to start at the beginning. Prepare for this by setting out a good focus question in your plans and use that question at the start of your lesson. You should also have topical questions in the margins of your lesson plan or in your teacher's guide or whatever, so that while you're teaching, you have those handy so that you can take kids to deeper level with their understanding. The last piece is you need to work to develop student academic language. And again, it's underlined, so do look it up. Here's some ways to think about it. Academic language, some things to consider. How will you use talk to move students in their learning? How will they talk about and write about the subject matter? How will you be sure that subject matter terms and ideas are understood by your students as they do the talking and the writing? So make sure the talk or the language isn't unidirectional. It's not just about you talking and telling them things. They need to be using talk to tell things to each other and to you, and to develop understanding through that talk. And that talk needs to be framed in a couple different ways. One is, it does have to have the right terms that go with the subject matter, but that's only part of it. They need to be talking about the subject matter in the way that fits the subject matter. So if you're doing a math class, people are making conjectures, they're justifying things, they're proving things. And if you're doing the literacy class, then there's other ways to talk about text, making inferences or trying to predict things along the way. So the kinds of talk fits the subject matter. So if it's academic, it fits an academic subject. So think about that and talk to your mentors and your mentors along the way to understand how that works well. The other piece is that you want it to work around UDL principles, and this might be new to you, but here's an outline of what those are. So principle one, let me back up a bit. UDL is an educational framework based on research in the learning sciences, cognitive neuroscience, and it guides the development of flexible learning environments to address individual learning differences. So this fits with the notion of three focus students. Instead of making one lesson that fits for all, a generic lesson where everybody may or may not get something out of it, you want to tailor the lesson so there's handholds and avenues for all of your students. And UDL has three different ways to think about this, so let's take a look at this here. First principle, multiple means of representation, and this is usually on your part. Make sure that in your plans and in your teaching, you use visuals, charts, physical models, acting out the important ideas. Do not just tell kids what you want them to know, show them. So if you imagine a teacher in the front who goes through an entire lesson never having referred to something on a board, a picture, or an artifact, or acting something out, then you're missing all kinds of ways, then that teacher's missing all kinds of ways to get ideas across to kids. So multiple means of representation is don't live just by talk, don't live just by telling, show, act out, engage. Second principle, multiple means of action and expression, and this is on the student's part. Give your kids room to show you what they are understanding in more than one way. Allow students to write about what they are learning, tell you about it, and show you by acting out, modeling, or making something. And of course, this goes to the notion of diverse learners in the classroom. You have to put in your plans ways for kids to show you what they get out of your lesson, making opportunities for them to show you in more than one way. And the last one, multiple means of engagement, the why of learning. Make it possible for your students to do more than listen and fill out a worksheet. Have them work with each other, so a lot of social learning too. Have them work with each other to show you what they're learning. Have them pair share and do group work or make something as they engage the content. So that's also like PBL too. It's like, is there a project? Are there materials they might use in an interesting way to show you how they're learning and why they're learning? So the next piece is about the different steps. The first one is step 1, plan. And there's more detail on each of these further in the document, but this is just the overview. You want to be planning appropriate content with appropriate content focus, and they're suggesting and asking you to move from California content standards and other frameworks. Okay, so most likely your mentor teacher, you'll be teaching a lesson within a unit of study that your mentor teacher may be setting out. So you may be teaching one lesson within the subject of decimals or something like that. And then you need to refer to how that fits with the standards framework. The second piece, content-specific pedagogy. Again, these are all underlined, so look them up. Content-specific pedagogy means you need to teach that subject in a way that fits best with that subject matter's philosophy, ways of doing things. So you don't teach a math lesson the way you would teach a literacy lesson. So math lessons might be full of problem solving, full of working out problems, discussing them, trying different solutions, whereas a literacy classroom might be deep text analysis, rewriting, those kinds of things. And so your teaching has to match that subject matter. And then the last one is knowledge of your students, which is being pushed on all along the way. So the last piece is that you need to be focused on either literacy or mathematics. So this first paragraph plan, here it is in a nutshell. You need to have a lesson on a subject matter topic. It needs to work from a standards framework. You want to plan your teaching in a way that fits that content. That's content-specific pedagogy. And you want to plan from your knowledge of students. And Cycle 1 and Cycle 2 are all about literacy and math. So for Cycle 1, if you choose literacy to do for Cycle 1, you will need to do math for Cycle 2. And vice versa. If you choose to do math first, then the second cycle needs to be literacy. So it's all about the planning. And the planning can be done with the lesson plan templates that you might have in your program, but you might find it more convenient, more focused to use the template they provide. Most of my students have done that in the past. They find that to be a much better way of going about it, to be in line with the requirements of CalTPA. The second step, step 2, teach and assess. You want to teach the planned lesson to students and video record the lesson. There are a lot of instructions about video recording that will come up later. Select and annotate clips from your video. And the annotations you provide should describe how you create a positive and safe learning environment. So there's a number of things here, and it's all going to show up in this tab over here too. Set expectations for learning. Engage students in content-specific higher order thinking. Monitor for student understanding through assessment. So each one of these, you've got one. Okay, so the first one is positive, safe environment for learning. Second one is expectations for learning. The other one is about higher order thinking. Make sure that happens, and that you use assessment to understand what's going on. So teach the lesson, video record the lesson, annotate the clips for positive, safe environment, setting expectations, engaging students in higher order thinking, checking for understanding. So a good way to think about it is have these in mind as you're planning, right? So when you're organizing your lesson, you're thinking about material use, who's going to sit where, how your room's going to be organized, how you set out for a positive environment. Plan how you're going to set up your expectations so everybody knows what they're about and in a positive way. Plan how you're going to engage students in higher order thinking. Mark where you're going to make checks for understanding. Do all of this in your planning. Don't wait for it to happen in your actual teaching, because you will not necessarily remember all of these. So do put these markers in your plan somewhere. You might have a plan, you might use a lesson plan template for CalTPA as a frame, but you might have another one with notes on it where you put all of these good things in there. Okay, and this is, I'm going to say, this is probably the heart of what you need to be thinking of as you organize yourself for Cycle 1. Okay, so that's step 2, teach and assess. So step 1 was all about getting to know your kids, your subject matter, and how you're going to teach it. Step 2 is all about actually teaching, recording, and marking all the 4 important things that are required. Step 3 is reflect. What they want you to do here is to plan a lesson in response to the teaching and what you learned from the lesson you'd done prior. So it's always a cycle. You teach a lesson, you learn from that lesson that helps you for the next lesson to do better for your kids and for your teaching. So that's what they want you to do here. You want to set it out so that you're setting up in the moment adaptations for specific students. Essentially, that means just go make sure you have time to go check on those students, spend time with them appropriately, or organize groups or other things to make the learning happen for them well. So that also connects with indicating what you need to do to support your 3 focus students in that. So write a full paragraph for each of your 3 focus students. So when you talk about how you're going to support them in your write-up, it's always best if they ask about the 3 focus students, write a paragraph about each. Don't bundle them together. If you bundle them together in your writing, you're kind of making them into a mob and showing that you're not paying particular attention to any one of them. So write a full paragraph for each of your 3 focus students. Write specifically about what you did in your planning and teaching to address the needs you described in the context description you made for each of the 3. So that's the first template you will fill out, which is a description of each one of it will ask you to describe your whole class, but then it will ask you to describe each of your focus students. And so this should be parallel. So the way you support them should fit with how you've described them in the context information you set out in the template. Step 4 is apply. And this is a template as well. You will describe what you would do differently to advance the learning of the class as a whole. And if you were to teach this lesson again, what would you do the same or differently to improve learning for the whole class? And there's some requirements for this one too. You have to give good reasons for what you do differently. Make sure the justification for the change is about what students learned or how they engaged the material. Focus on the whole class here. So next, across the entire instructional cycle of planning, teaching, assessing, reflecting, and applying, you want to demonstrate your ability to address learning needs for the whole class as well as the 3 focus students. And in this section, it's all about who these folks are. You also see that there are places where there are underlines that will connect you to definitions as well. So focus student 1, identified as an English learner. Focus student 2, a student has been identified with IEPs or 504s or in GATE. If you're teaching primary, you'll need to work around this differently. Often kindergarten or first grade kids have not been identified yet, so work with your mentors or instructors to find the workaround. And focus student 3 is a bit open. Focus student 3 is a student whose life experiences either inside or outside of school may result in a need for additional academic or emotional support and whose behavior in class catches your attention. So that's kind of your decision about who that student is. And that's a good one to find that student, talk to your mentor or teacher. Okay, as they say here, talk with your master, mentor, or supervising teacher to learn about individual students. Refer to subsequent notes regarding strategies to gather information for focus students. So again, one student coming to English from another language, one student identified as needing special attention and services, one student who comes to their learning differently than most. So think about it that way. And more on the overview. So this says focus cycle 1 is on one of the 2 disciplines, literacy or mathematics, and focus cycle 2 on the discipline that was not addressed in cycle 1. And best to make one cycle math, the other literacy. They're offering you a different way to think about it here. Focus, this is the OR, integration of another content area, focus on the other cycle of mathematics with integration of other content. You can decide if you want to do this integrated way. For my students, it's always been best just to choose math or literacy. Okay. So about content-specific pedagogy and multiple subject literacy, planning, instruction, assessment, reflection, and or application provide attention to multiple subject literacy concepts and principles through the following. So things to pay attention to. Creating an environment where students learn to read and write, comprehend and compose, appreciate and analyze, and perform and engage the learning arts through a multiplicity of text. And the other part, developing oral communications and interpersonal skills. So If you choose literacy for Cycle 1, do make sure that students engage in text and talk about it. Text and talk, because they want to be interpreting what's going on with the text. If you choose mathematics, you want to be working from the standards for mathematical practice. There are 8 of them. Look them up. They go with the standards documents. And I have standards links here. You can look them up for yourself. Lots of good materials out there. I wrote down what's important is that students do mathematics, not just be told or shown a mathematical routine. So students have to be doing mathematics, not just receiving knowledge. Most important is have students actually solve problems. They should use math to work out something unknown, not just perform a routine. And that goes to higher order thinking too, one of the requirements. Helping students develop the knowledge, skills, and academic language to appropriately, first, use processes of problem solving, reasoning, improve communication, representations, and connections to real-world problems, and you want them to be able to apply the strands of mathematical proficiency, including adaptive reasoning, strategic competence, conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and productive disposition. Put this in a nutshell, these are all hows, how people do mathematics, not just the knowledge of stuff. So have students talk through and show their problem solving. That's how you get to all of B and A. Give attention to the mathematical language they will need to do this. Okay, so lots of showing, lots of telling, and that's how you capture how they're developing their academic language and their knowledge in the subject matter of math. The next piece is going to matter to you a lot, so make sure you always know you're going to page 5 when you need to. Evidence table, step 1, describes all the things you need to do. You need to gather contextual information. You need to be working from standards and frameworks. You need to say how your plans will address the learning needs of your students, including references to how it matters to UDL. And then you also want to add instructional resources, and these are things that you can upload alongside whatever anchor charts you're using or text forms or whatever. So things you need to submit. Getting to know your students is a template, your actual lesson plan. And my suggestion here is that you use these things as a checklist of your progress. So go ahead and say, do I have this? Do I have this? Do I have this? Do I have this? Collect and keep everything along the way. And as I said before, best to use the lesson plan template from CalTPA. It focuses on what matters. So written narrative, lesson plan rationale. Aside from the lesson plan itself, you have to go into justifying what you've put into that lesson plan. That's another template. And then you have related instructional resources. And these are images, PDFs, things that you will upload along the way. But there are 3 templates here. The first template is getting to know your students. The second is likely to be the lesson plan template you use from CalTPA. And the third is the written narrative. Step 2 is teach and assess. You teach the lesson. You record the lesson. And then you need to make sure that you're doing these things along the way. And that will be explained later on in step 2 of the videos. How you create a positive classroom environment and set expectations for learning is the first thing that needs to happen. It needs to be shown in your video recording. Second, how you engage students in activities and use instructional strategies. Okay, so the involvement and what you're doing to encourage involvement. And then how you clarify next steps for learning. That's often the closure part. So you think about at the very end of a lesson or along the way, you say, based on what we know now, maybe this will be the way we go next, or this is what we will be teaching tomorrow. So I'm going to say right now that a number of my students have struggled with number 3, and they forget it. Don't forget that third part, that you have to set out for kids. What's the next thing that's going to follow this lesson? You need to be very clear about that. And you can see what they have here. Annotations will need to do these things. And as I said before, make sure you set them out in your lesson plan so that they know that you know that they show up in your teaching. Creating a positive learning environment, setting expectations for learning, engaging students in content-specific higher order thinking, and monitoring for student understanding. Those are the checks for understanding that I talked about before. So more detail on this later, but a suggestion for you. You want to record the entire lesson and worry about what clips to make later. And for some of you might have to do more than one lesson and choose the lesson. You might have to plan more than one lesson and choose the better lesson. Plan your lessons so that the key topics that need to be annotated are plainly evident. Okay, and that will come up more later in step 2. But as I was saying, make sure in your planning they are there. You don't want to teach the lesson and go, well, I didn't have the moment where I was supposed to be making, where I don't want to miss the moment where I was making a positive learning environment. Step 3, reflect. Provide responses to prompts that describe how successful you were in using student assets and learning needs to plan an appropriate, relevant, and rigorous literacy or mathematics lesson to your whole class and 3 focus students. And you want to cite evidence from steps 1 or 2 to support your reflection. This can't be made important enough. If you say your lesson did something for students' learning, show how. Talk about it where it shows up in the clips. Write about where you planned for it, how it showed up. You need to have evidence along the way. And of course, this written narrative, reflection on what you learned, is also a template. Okay, so what I write here is, take care with this one. Some think the planning and the teaching are what matters in the CalTPA. This part carries a lot of weight in the scoring. Do not just write it up and just get it done. Give it good attention. You remember the wheel they had at the beginning, the 4 parts? The planning, the TeachAssess, the reflect, and adapt to make the new lesson. Well, one of those 4 pieces is this reflection, so give it good attention. And the last part, step 4, provide responses to the prompts regarding how you learned through completing the assessment cycle. Provide responses to prompts regarding how what you learned through completing this assessment cycle will advance your teaching practice and describe next instructional steps for your students. Cite evidence from steps 1, 2, or 3 to demonstrate your rationale for the next instructional steps for your students. Again, evidence, evidence, evidence. This shows up in the rubrics a lot, so make sure you are collecting that along the way, and that when you write about this, and it is another template, so you have a narrative of no more than 3 pages of written or no more than 5 minutes of video explanation for the application of what you learn. That's the name of the template. And whatever you write for this step must be accompanied by evidence. Describe what you would do differently and clearly justify why based on your students' work or engagement in this lesson. Again, give evidence. I put that there 2 or 3 times because this is a place where some folks struggle and will lose points. Many folks who go through CalTPA put so much energy on planning and the teaching and the annotation, and think about step 3 and 4 as, oh, those are just the other things I do. They count heavily too, so give those 2 serious attention as well. So the next video is going to be on planning, and I hope this first video on the overview has been useful.